Close your eyes and imagine the world continuing without you. Your mother still exists. The wind still rustles through trees you never climbed. The moon still rises over rooftops you never touched. But there's no child with your name, no laughter with your cadence, no photos with your face. In this world, you were never born, not because of tragedy, but because of a twist in time, a quiet slip, a missed encounter between your grandparents that never took place. No argument, no catastrophe, just absence. And yet everything feels out of sync. A ripple stretches through reality like a crack beneath glass. This is the haunting core of the grandfather paradox. And what happens if you go back in time and stop the person who created you? The logic collapses in on itself. If you were never born, how could you have gone back? And if you didn't go back, then nothing was changed. But if nothing changed, then you were born. A closed loop, a logic trap, a philosophical cul-de-sac with no exit sign. But beneath the theory, something more personal begins to whisper. Not just what if you were never born, but why do you sometimes feel like you weren't supposed to be here in the first place? That's where the emotional paradox begins. Because even without time travel, you've likely felt the eerie sensation that your life is a borrowed one, that you're living in a timeline that almost didn't happen. Maybe that's why certain days feel so fragile, like a thread that might snap under too much attention, or why some memories shimmer like mirages, blurry, suspicious, tender. In psychology, there's a defense mechanism called denial of origin. It's when the unconscious mind suppresses the idea that one's roots might be broken or accidental. Some people carry this from birth, adopted children, children born from trauma, children told they were a mistake. They carry a paradox in their chest. I exist, but I wasn't meant to. The grandfather paradox is not so different. It externalizes that question and lets you poke at it from a safer distance. What would the world lose, really, if you were never born? Would it notice? Would anything unravel? You might think of all the people you've touched, all the smiles or pain or stories you've accidentally shaped. But underneath, there may still be a fear that you're not real, that you're a copy, a glitch, a placeholder in a timeline meant for someone else, like waking up in a house you don't remember building filled with photographs of people who seem to know you, though you don't recognize them. Symbolically, the image is of a birthday candle already melted, its flame never lit, a celebration that was skipped, a name never spoken, a story unopened, and yet you are here. That's the contradiction. Your breath is steady. Your eyes are reading this. Your mind is wondering. That's the beauty and the terror. You are the paradox. If you could walk backward through your life, what moment would you try to rewrite? A fight that changed everything. A silence that grew into a wall. A door that never reopened. And if you did rewrite it, would the current version of you disappear? Here's the real question. How much of who you are today was forged from events you would undo if given the chance? We like to believe in clean narratives, that who we are is the result of choice logic and growth. But so much of us is stitched together from accidents and contradictions. The friend you only met because you missed a train, the job you only took because something else collapsed, the love that bloomed in grief, the meaning that rose from mistakes. So now the paradox becomes emotional, not just logical. If you erase the pain, do you also erase the person who grew from it? This is what makes time travel feel so holy and horrifying. The idea that a single thread pulled in the past can unravel the soul you carry in the present. And yet, there's a deeper stillness behind the logic trap. What if you were never meant to untangle the loop? What if you were only meant to feel it, to rest inside its unsolvable beauty? Maybe your existence isn't proof of logical consistency. Maybe it's a sacred contradiction. So tonight, as your mind slows and shadows lengthen across the walls of your thoughts, I invite you to hold this image, a candle lit by a hand that no longer exists, casting a glow on a face that might never have been. And ask yourself not to solve the paradox, but to sit with it. What part of you still wonders if you were ever supposed to be here at all? There are moments in life so small, so ordinary, they pass unnoticed. A glance, a delay, a word not spoken. But sometimes if you slow down enough to trace the outline of your life in reverse, you find these soft moments carrying strange weight. You realize that if one of them had changed, if someone had turned left instead of right, picked up, instead of hung up, knocked, instead of walked away, you might not be here at all. That's the quiet violence of the butterfly effect. The idea that a butterfly flapping its wings in one part of the world could set off a chain of events that leads to a storm in another. In this case, the butterfly is you, and the storm is also you. When you look back, you might notice your life is held together by broken threads, fractured relationships, detours. You didn't choose losses you didn't ask for. You survived because something failed. You grew because something ended. You met someone because something else fell apart. So the paradox becomes this: the damage wasn't just damage, it was architecture. The fracture was also a design. In psychology, we often seek clarity, cause and effect, healing and closure. But reality rarely plays fair, and neither does the unconscious. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." So what happens when the threads you think are holding you together are actually pulling you apart? Imagine a torn sleeve on an old jacket you can't throw away. The thread dangles, catching on everything. You keep telling yourself you'll fix it, but somehow you don't. Maybe because it reminds you of something or someone. Maybe because deep down that imperfection feels more honest than perfection ever did. You are like that jacket, worn in the right places, torn in ways no one else can see. And yet you carry on butterfly wings, brushing the air, sending out ripples that may never return to you. We rarely consider that our choices are also collisions, that when you walk into someone's life, you are altering their trajectory, even if you never speak again. So what if one of your smallest decisions, one text, one refusal, one forgotten goodbye, created an echo that changed someone's life entirely? Would you even know? Would they? And in that echo, what if someone years from now, miles away, wonders why their life feels slightly out of place, like a puzzle piece missing its corner? What if you're their butterfly? What if they're yours? The paradox expands again. We think of time as linear and ourselves as central. But what if time is a tapestry and we are threads that only make sense in relation to others? Your story doesn't live inside you alone. It lives in how you brushed past strangers at airports, in the way you cried on the phone, in the way you said nothing when you could have. These moments forgotten by you might be remembered forever by someone else. And here's where it gets harder. If your presence can ripple outward without your awareness, so can your absence. The friend you never met because you skipped that party, the love that never happened because you left early, the child never born because two people never crossed paths, the life unlived because a butterfly never flapped its wings. In a way, the grandfather paradox is less about impossible time loops and more about unseen causality. It's the emotional realization that we are all walking through one another's timelines, constantly altering them, constantly being altered. So the question becomes, are you the storm or the butterfly? You may never know, but maybe knowing isn't the point. Maybe the point is humility, to recognize that your life, no matter how solitary it feels at times, is interwoven with thousands of others in ways you'll never understand. and that even your softest choices, your pauses, your hesitations, your briefest kindnesses are threads pulling on the edges of something far bigger than you. Here's an image to hold a loose thread dangling from a tapestry, golden and glimmering in the light. It's fraying, almost ready to snap. But instead of unraveling the whole, it shifts the shape of the pattern. Not destroyed, just different. And maybe that's all you are. A shift, a breath, a change so gentle no one saw it coming. So tonight I leave you with this soft question. If your smallest action could change the course of someone else's life forever, would you still think of yourself as insignificant? Some nights when silence stretches thin and everything feels slower, you might sense it, that gentle wrongness in the air, as if the world is breathing in instead of out, as if time for just a moment is reversing. You glance at the clock, it still ticks forward, but your body remembers something else. A pause, a flicker, a moment that echoes before it even happens. You've been here before, haven't you? This is the subtle terror of time, not as a straight line, but as a spiral, or a loop, or a mirror facing another mirror. When you peel back the illusion of chronology, the grandfather paradox stops being about killing your grandfather. It becomes a symbol for something else, your own inability to locate yourself in time. You think you're moving forward, but what if time is moving through you? What if the future is pulling you toward it, not the past pushing you ahead? What if your decisions are echoes of something already waiting? In Jungian language, there's a concept of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that seem too precise to be random, too personal to be ignored. They hint at something beyond cause and effect, a deeper pattern, like a dream that aligns with waking life, like meeting someone who feels familiar before a word is spoken, like time folding in on itself. So here's a thought experiment. What if every moment you've lived has already happened and is also still happening? Imagine your life not as a river, but as a lake, still, reflective. The ripples you see are not from movement, but from memory. You stand at the shore, touching only what you already carry inside. A clock ticks, but it could be ticking backward. It could be unmaking each second as it arrives. You wouldn't know because you've learned to believe in direction, in past, then present, then future. But belief is not proof, and time does not owe you linearity. In dreams, time stretches and collapses. Hours pass in seconds. A lifetime unfolds between blinks. Have you ever dreamt of an entire day only to wake and realize minutes had passed? The clock didn't lie, but it didn't tell the whole truth either. The symbolic image here is simple: a grandfather clock, regal, and still its hands spinning in reverse, at first slowly, then faster, until the numbers blur and vanish. Not breaking, just undoing. In that image, you are both the observer and the mechanism. You are the one watching time collapse and the one collapsing it. The paradox tightens. If you return to your beginning, do you meet yourself or your opposite? And if you reverse your own path, do you arrive at a version of you who chose differently? Zimbardo once said that our relationship to time defines our mental health. Some live trapped in regret, pulled back by a past they can't change. Others obsess over an ideal future, unable to exist in the now. But those who drift, those who float between moments, aware of time's illusion, are often the ones closest to stillness and to madness. And you perhaps are one of them. Because deep down, haven't you always sensed that time doesn't quite fit you? That you arrive late to feelings? That joy lags behind its cause? That grief hits early before the loss arrives? That you live with delay or acceleration or something in between? We build our lives around the assumption that time is reliable, that it carries us like a train. But what if you are not riding time, but carrying it? What if time is your own shadow, a projection of your movement, not the other way around? In this view, the grandfather paradox becomes emotional, psychological. It reflects your inner dislocation, your feeling of being too early or too late to your own life, of being haunted by moments that never finished happening. You are not alone in that feeling. There's a word in Portuguese, saudade. It means a longing for something that never fully existed. Not quite nostalgia, not quite loss. More like a phantom ache for a time that maybe could have been. That's what this part of the paradox feels like. The ache of an unchosen path curling backward through your bloodstream. If you've ever stood in a room and felt the past pressing through the walls, if you've ever spoken a sentence and felt like you were echoing yourself, if you've ever had the sense that your life is looping through you, not the other way around, then you've touched this. And maybe it means the clock inside you doesn't follow rules. Maybe it unwinds when you're alone, or rewinds in your sleep, or skips entirely when your heart is breaking. So the question isn't what if time ran backward? The question is what part of you already does? Tonight, sit with that image. A clock not broken but honest. A spiral, not a straight line. A version of you standing still while the world rushes past in both directions. And ask yourself not to understand, but simply to notice. Where in your life does time feel wrong? Imagine turning a corner in your own life and seeing yourself. Not in a mirror, not in a dream, but real, breathing, younger, before the heartbreak, before the fear, before you learned how to pretend you were fine. Your past self untouched by all that came after. Looking up at you with eyes still full of questions. Still soft, still wide open. What would you say? Would you warn them? Would you protect them? Would you even recognize them? Or would you feel a quiet shame for all the ways you couldn't keep the promises they hadn't yet made? This is where the grandfather paradox turns inward. Not as a sci-fi problem, but as a mirror of emotional time travel. Because deep down, isn't that what memory is? A return to the versions of you that still live inside, unchanged, unfinished, unseen. You've met your past self before, just not with your eyes. You meet them when you flinch at a certain tone, when you can't explain why a room feels wrong, when you overreact to something small and later wonder, why did that hurt so much? That's the child version of you, the teenager, the lost 20-something, still looping through the background, still waiting to be heard, still walking through time as if they never left. In psychology, this is the inner child, a phrase that sounds soft but carries immense weight, because the inner child isn't just your younger self, it's your first self, the blueprint, the one who felt things purely before the armor grew. And when you meet them through a flash of memory, a dream, a triggered emotion, it's not fiction, it's the loop reopening. So what happens when the self you've become meets the self you once were? Do you feel pride, regret, longing? Or something harder to name, a kind of mourning for the path not taken, the potential not fulfilled, the simplicity, lost? Picture two versions of you in a room. One is smaller, curious, still untouched by certain truths. The other is you now wiser maybe, but heavier, holding more than you thought you could. You look at each other, and the silence is thick. Not because there's nothing to say, but because everything is already understood. And yet there's still a question, would your younger self be proud of you? Or would they feel betrayed? This isn't self-criticism, it's existential tenderness. Because if the past shaped you, then you also shape the past by how you remember it. If you only see your younger self through the lens of who you became, you distort them. You edit their wonder, you rewrite their innocence, you make them small just to make yourself coherent. The paradox deepens if you change the past emotionally by healing how you see it. Do you change who you are now? Trauma says yes. Jung believed that our personal myths must be rewritten to allow true individuation, that until we reconcile with our past selves, we will carry their wounds as fate, not history. And so maybe the real time travel isn't in machines or wormholes, but in memory, in the courage to meet who you used to be without judgment, to say, I see you, I remember. You were never too much, you were never wrong to feel it. The image here is stark, two mirrors facing each other, creating a hallway of infinite versions of you. Each one slightly different, each one reaching toward the next. You're not just one self, you're a corridor of selves, past, present, future, all whispering to one another across moments that only exist inside you. Now imagine this. You're allowed 5 minutes with your past self. Any version, any age, no time travel consequences, just presence. What would you say? Would you offer comfort? Would you apologize? Would you listen? Or would you simply cry, grieving the innocence that was traded for survival? That's the emotional core of this paradox, the sense that you're constantly splitting across time, leaving pieces of yourself in every room you outgrew. And still here you are, whole somehow, incomplete always. You're the result of 1,000 internal conversations you've never finished, and perhaps never will. But maybe you don't need to. Maybe it's enough to feel the weight of those versions, to sit beside them without trying to fix them, to be the one they needed now. So tonight, as your breath slows and your mind drifts, imagine sitting across from your past self. No words, just stillness, a hand reaching for a hand, a recognition, a return. And ask yourself gently, who do I become when I no longer abandon who I was? What if love wasn't linear? What if it didn't begin when you met them or end when they left? What if it circled, folded, returned over and over, echoing through different versions of you, whispering the same ache in different forms? You call it heartbreak, you call it fate, but maybe it's just the same loop unfolding through a different mask. Imagine this. You fall in love with someone whose existence depends on a time loop. Maybe you've met them before, maybe you meet them again. Maybe they only exist because you go back. You fall, knowing it isn't supposed to last. You love them, knowing that to preserve the timeline, you'll have to leave, or forget, or never meet at all. The paradox is unbearable. Can a feeling be real if its context is fabricated? If the person you love only exists because the loop demands it does that make the emotion any less true. And yet, doesn't that mirror something we've all felt? That soft devastation when you love someone who isn't meant to stay. Not because of time travel, but because of life. Geography, growth, timing, the 1,000 tiny things that tear people apart. Still love blooms, it always does, even in timelines where it shouldn't. Adler's psychology insists that people move toward purpose, not pain. But sometimes love doesn't align with purpose. Sometimes love is the detour, the beautiful mistake, the place where you paused your trajectory to feel something impossible. In a time loop, maybe you and this person always find each other, but always at the wrong moment. Maybe they're arriving just as you're leaving. Maybe they remember what you've forgotten. Maybe your connection is the glitch, the anomaly, the miracle. There's a symbol in your dreams, a kiss that never finishes landing. You reach for it. You feel it brush your skin, but then it's gone. And you wake up with the memory of a warmth that never fully existed. How many people do you carry like that? How many names you can't forget, even when time tries to erode them? We don't talk enough about the grief of incomplete love, the kind that didn't break it, just unraveled, quietly, inevitably. The goodbye that wasn't a word, but a shift. A door closed without slamming, a season changing without notice. In this sense, the grandfather paradox becomes a metaphor for emotional dissonance. You want to change the past to be ready sooner, braver, less afraid. But to do so would alter the very self that loved them in the first place. So again, you ask, was it real if it couldn't last? And maybe the better question is, does love need permanence to be sacred? There's a kind of love that doesn't want to own, doesn't want to fix. It just wants to witness, to exist for a while inside someone else's timeline without needing to reshape it. It hurts, but it's honest. And in that honesty, maybe there's something more enduring than forever. You might not realize it, but your heart remembers loops. It remembers what your mind forgets, that first feeling of being seen. The moment someone said your name and it didn't feel heavy, the safety of a silence that didn't need to be filled. Even if the person is gone, the loop continues. Not in regret, but in reverence. Maybe you've already loved someone you were never meant to meet, and maybe you'll love them again in another form. A friend, a stranger, a character in a dream. The paradox is this: you can lose someone completely and still feel them shaping your every thought. So what do we do with love that loops? We don't solve it, we sit with it, we honor it, we stop trying to make it linear. Tonight, as you rest, imagine yourself holding hands with someone whose timeline no longer touches yours. There's no anger, no apology, just presence, just the echo of a love that asked nothing except to be felt while it lasted. And ask yourself, can I let something be beautiful, even if it was never meant to stay? Some things don't begin with you. Some fears are older than your memory. Some patterns cling like shadows moving through generations, like whispers that never fade. You might think the grandfather paradox is about you going back in time to break a family line, but maybe in a quieter way. The family line has always been inside you, already looping, already haunting, already rewriting. What if trauma travels like a time traveler too? Not in a machine, but in behavior, in silence, in nervous systems shaped before birth, in lullabies never sung, in rooms where doors slammed too loud, in dinners where no one spoke the truth. The paradox here isn't about going back. It's that the past never really left. Gabor Maté speaks often of this inheritance. That trauma isn't just what happened, it's what didn't happen. The hug not given, the apology not heard, the safety not felt. We carry these absences like echoes in our bones. They ripple through time, shaping the way we speak, choose, react, without us even noticing. You flinch when you hear that tone. You withdraw before someone can leave. You try to fix what was never yours to fix. You love like it's a transaction. You apologize before speaking, and you don't know why. You just do. Because somewhere along the line, someone didn't feel safe, and that feeling got passed down, not through words, but through reactions, through silence, through tension, through the things that were never allowed to be felt. Trauma loops, not just within a person, but within a family, a culture, a system. It's not your fault, but it may be your turn. So what if the grandfather paradox isn't about eliminating your lineage, but about interrupting its pain? Imagine it like this. You walk through a door into your past, but instead of changing one event, you sit beside your grandfather when he was still a boy. You notice the fear in his shoulders. You hear the way he talks about failure. You see how his own father looked at him distant, hard, unsure how to love, hard. And then you understand it didn't begin with him either. This isn't blame, this is recognition. You're not going back to destroy a timeline. You're going back to witness it, to say, I see what shaped you, and I choose something different now. Symbolically, picture a wound that opens in a dream. It bleeds, but you wake up with no scar. Still the pain lingers. This is how trauma travels, psychic, invisible, real. In the body, it shows up as tension, illness, exhaustion with no explanation. In the psyche, it looks like self-sabotage, like fear of intimacy, like hyper-independence mistaken for strength. The paradox here is simple. You didn't cause it, but it lives inside you anyway. And this creates a deep question. How do you heal a past you never lived, but still carry? It begins with presence, with noticing, with naming what was never allowed to be named. It begins when you pause mid-reaction and ask, whose voice is this? Whose fear am I feeling? Whose silence am I protecting? Sometimes healing looks like doing what your ancestors couldn't. Saying no, speaking up, resting, crying, being gentle. Sometimes healing looks like confusion because you're the first one to interrupt the loop. And there's no map for that. But here's the deeper truth. You're not broken. You're repeating. And once you realize that you can begin to choose something new, not because you're stronger, but because you're aware. And awareness is the first break in the cycle. Tonight, imagine your timeline like a thread running through your chest. It pulses not just with your memories, but with the unlived pain of those before you. But now in this breath, you hold the thread in your hand. You can tie a knot, you can let it loosen, you can even decide where it ends. Because while trauma travels through time, so does healing. And maybe you're not the glitch, maybe you're the repair. So ask yourself softly, what part of me is asking to be freed from a story I didn't write? There's a particular kind of frustration that lives inside every thinker, every over-analyzer, every seeker of clean answers. It's the ache that says, if I can just figure it out, then I can finally rest. You felt it, that impulse to solve the unsolvable, to wrap the mystery in logic, to fix the broken thing once and for all. And so naturally, when presented with a paradox, your instinct is to eliminate it. You try to kill the loop, close the time circle, patch the contradiction. But the grandfather paradox laughs at that because every attempt to resolve it only deepens the trap. You can't kill the past without killing the self that remembers it. You can't eliminate the cause without erasing the effect. And even if you could, what part of you are you willing to sacrifice to make the math work? Philosophers and physicists have tried Zeno's paradoxes, the Novikov self-consistency principle, closed time-like curves, all elaborate attempts to fold the fabric of reality into a cleaner narrative. But here's the thing. The mind may crave logic, but the soul thrives in mystery. You don't need to destroy the paradox. You need to stop fighting it, because maybe the paradox is the point. Symbolically, imagine a rope tied into an impossible knot. You pull, hoping it'll come undone, but it tightens. You twist, loop, struggle, but the more you tug, the more it resists. Until finally, you stop, you breathe. You realize the knot isn't in the rope, it's in you. This is the illusion of solving your story, of believing that if you go back far enough, if you trace every wound, every reason, every cause, you'll find the clean line, the origin, but you won't. Because you are not a formula. You are a field, a cloud, a contradiction made flesh. Jung warned against reducing the psyche to parts and equations. He believed that wholeness comes not from fixing, but from integrating, from holding opposites, from allowing paradox to remain side by side without collapse. So when you try to kill the paradox, when you try to erase the part of your life that doesn't make sense, you risk erasing the very depth that makes you human. Think about the moments you most wish you could undo, the betrayals, the regrets, the moments you weren't enough or were too much, the ones that don't fit into the story you want to tell. And now ask without them, would you still be you? It's painful to admit, but sometimes we're shaped most by what didn't go according to plan. And so the paradox remains, you long for clarity, but you grow in contradiction. You crave resolution, but you deepen in mystery. This is why killing the paradox never works. Because when you try to resolve it completely, you make yourself smaller to fit the shape of your understanding. And you're not small. You're vast, complex, spiraled like time itself. Here's a softer image. A spiral staircase in a quiet tower. You're walking upward, but each step seems to return to the same view, just slightly shifted. The higher you go, the more you realize you're not escaping. You're revisiting, not trapped, just circling, becoming That staircase is your growth. Each loop isn't a failure, it's a deepening. So maybe the question isn't, how do I kill the paradox? Maybe the question is, can I let it live inside me without needing to solve it? Because maybe healing isn't a straight line. Maybe healing is a paradox. You forgive people who never apologized. You grieve things that never fully existed. You learn to love in the place where trust once died. You find beauty in what almost ruined you. And somehow in that contradiction, you become more whole, not less. Tonight, let yourself rest with this. The paradox is not your enemy. It is your mirror. It reflects all that you've carried, all that you've questioned, all that you've survived. It cannot be killed, but it can be understood, not with the mind, but with the soul. So ask yourself gently, what if I don't need to fix this? What if I only need to feel it? You may believe that you can return to the past, not with a machine, but with memory, with guilt, with longing. You close your eyes and slip backward, rehearsing the scene, the words you wish you'd said, the version of yourself you wish had shown up instead. You replay it, polish it, try to make it right in your mind, but it never changes, does it? The script remains the same because the one trying to rewrite the past isn't the one who lived it, it's the ego. And the ego can't time travel. The ego is rooted in now. It's the voice that says, I should have known better. I could have done more, but the younger you, the one who stood in that moment, didn't have this hindsight. That version of you made choices with limited tools, with different fears, with less light. The ego forgets that. It demands consistency where there was only becoming. And so you try to control the past from the safety of the present. You try to rewrite a memory, like editing a film, splicing in new lines, cutting out the shame. But memory isn't a movie, it's a nervous system. It doesn't care about your revisions. It only cares about what it felt. That's why some memories still live in your chest, not your mind. That's why your stomach tightens when someone says a name. Why your hands shake when no one's watching. The paradox here is sharp. You've outgrown the moment, but the moment hasn't outgrown you. In Jungian thought, the ego is just one part of the self. It's the narrator, not the author. It constructs identity, but it doesn't contain the totality of who you are. The ego resists paradox. It seeks certainty, narrative edges. But the deeper self, the unconscious, the symbolic, the soul, it moves in loops, symbols, dreams. It remembers in ways the ego can't tolerate. So when you return to the past and try to force it into a neat arc, you're asking something linear from something that was never meant to be straight. Here's an image to hold a suitcase full of photographs, but the faces are blurred. You know the story, you recognize the place, but the expressions shift. Were they angry? Were you safe? Did it really happen the way you remember? Your ego argues with your body. And your body doesn't answer, it just feels. That's the trap. Trying to impose meaning on something that wasn't meant to be understood, only witnessed. So what does it mean that the ego can't time travel? It means that healing won't come from the part of you that wants to fix the story. It will come from the part of you that's willing to hold it, to sit beside the younger you, not as judge, but as companion. To say, I don't need to rewrite you. I just need to understand what you were carrying. This shift changes everything. It means your job isn't to be consistent, it's to be compassionate. To stop asking yourself why you didn't know better. To start asking, what did I need back then, that I still haven't given myself? Symbolically, picture a timeline like a long bridge, but some planks are missing. You keep leaping over the gaps, trying not to fall. But what if instead of jumping forward, you turn around and rebuild what was skipped, not to change the past, but to give it dignity? Because every moment you disown becomes a ghost that walks beside you, and every moment you welcome becomes a part of your wholeness. The ego says, that was a mistake. The deeper self says, that was a lesson. The ego says, I failed. The deeper self says, I was learning. And here's the paradox. The more you try to fix the past, the more you get trapped in it. But the moment you surrender, when you stop resisting what was, you begin to move freely. again. Because healing doesn't mean time traveling backward to erase your pain. It means bringing compassion forward to meet it. Tonight, sit with this softer truth. You are not the same person who lived those moments, but you are the only one who can return to them with kindness. And so the question is no longer, why did that happen? The question becomes, what is that moment still asking me to feel? You wake up, and for a moment before memory returns, you don't know where you are. The air feels too still. The room, too quiet. There's a taste of something left behind, something you can't name, a face, a phrase, a place you've never seen but somehow miss. You carry it through the morning like a secret bruise. It wasn't real, but it felt like it was. And then it happens again the next night. And the next. Slightly different, but familiar. As if your dreams are circling back to something they need you to notice. As if your unconscious is trying to tell you that time doesn't behave the way you've been told. Dreams don't follow clocks, they don't care about gravity, they don't obey the rules of plot. In one breath, you're a child again. In the next, you're watching yourself from above. Past and present blur. The dead speak, the lost return. You experience a loop not just of time, but of self. Jung believed dreams are compensatory. They balance what our waking life ignores. If you suppress something, your dream amplifies it. If you lose something, your dream returns it. So what does it mean when the same dream returns to you again and again? Perhaps it means you've left a version of yourself behind. Perhaps there's a part of you still waiting in that scene, trapped in that moment, unsure how to move forward. You might think it's just your brain filing away stress, but sometimes it feels deeper than that, like your soul walking through memories with different endings, not to escape the past, but to change your relationship to it. There's a recurring symbol in many people's dreams, a hallway with too many doors. Some are locked, some are open. Some lead to versions of your life you never chose. You walk through one and find yourself at an old job. Another brings you to a childhood home. One opens into a relationship that never happened. It's not nostalgia. It's not fantasy. It's possibility, unfinished timelines reaching out to be remembered. This is where the grandfather paradox takes on dreamlike logic. Because in dreams, paradoxes aren't problems, they're portals. You can exist and not exist. You can meet the person you used to be. You can rewrite endings, not to change reality, but to release the part of you that's still caught there. Zimbardo spoke of temporal perspective, how your orientation toward time shapes your decisions, your happiness, your sense of meaning. But what he didn't say outright is this: sometimes your past isn't in the past. It lives in the architecture of your dreams, waiting for you to open the door. And so you begin to pay attention. The same setting appears, the same emotion, the same unresolved feeling. You realize it's not random, it's repetition, a loop, a call. The unconscious doesn't knock politely. It sends storms, shadows, symbols. And when that doesn't work, it sends the dream again. Imagine your mind as a house with hidden floors. Every night you descend, and every night you return with a key you don't know how to use. The question is not, what does this dream mean, but what part of me is speaking through it? And here's where the paradox becomes gentle. The dream isn't trying to confuse you. It's trying to complete you. It's a rehearsal for healing, a place where you can feel what waking life won't let you: grief, rage, joy, forgiveness, possibility. Symbolically, it's like a doorway that keeps appearing in different rooms. You never remember opening it, but it's always there. Light slipping through the cracks. And part of you knows if you step through something, will shift. Not out there, but in here. So tonight, as you fall into sleep, try something new. Don't resist the dream. Don't wake up too fast. Let the image linger. Ask it what it wants. Ask it why it returned. And then just listen. Because Maybe the loop doesn't want to trap you. Maybe it wants to show you the places you're still holding breath. And maybe the dream isn't a glitch. Maybe it's a map. So the question is no longer, what does it mean? The question becomes, where does this dream want me to go within myself? Memory is a strange, tender trick. You think it's recording something neutral and factual, but it's not. It's a painting you've touched up over the years, brush stroke by brush stroke, detail by detail, until it no longer matches the original scene. And yet somehow it feels more real than what actually happened, more vivid, more emotionally precise. That's the paradox of memory. It lies, but it does so lovingly. You don't remember life as it was. You remember it as you needed it to be to survive, to explain the pain, to hold onto meaning. And so, even when the facts get fuzzy, the feelings remain sharp. You still feel the cold of that night, the silence of that goodbye, the thrill of that first risk. Even if your mind misremembers the words, the sensation lingers in the body like a ghost in the walls. It's easy to forget that memory is not just retrieval, it's reconstruction. Every time you recall a moment, you rebuild it with the tools you have now, not the tools you had then. That means your present self is editing your past self again and again in an unconscious loop of reinterpretation. So when you think about that fight, that breakup, that decision, you're not looking at a moment frozen in time. You're looking at a collage, layered with hindsight emotion and unspoken need. That's why two people can remember the same moment completely differently. It's not because someone's lying. It's because memory is subjective. It bends toward the identity you've built since. Now bring this back to the grandfather paradox. If going back in time creates contradiction, so does going back through memory. Because the person you are now didn't exist then. And the version of you then had a completely different framework, fear, and lens. So when you revisit the memory, you're not time traveling, you're time rewriting. And here's where it gets painful. Sometimes in the light of who you are now, your past looks worse. You see the signs you missed, the patterns you ignored, the way you accepted things you would never tolerate today, and it hurts. But the hurt isn't just grief, it's growth. It's the ache of outgrowing the story. There's a psychological term for this reconsolidation. When a memory is retrieved, it becomes briefly malleable, open to change. This means that every time you recall the past, you are reshaping it. Not the facts necessarily, but the emotional truth. You're allowed to reinterpret, you're allowed to soften, you're allowed to say, maybe I did the best I could. Symbolically, picture a journal tucked away in a drawer. When you open it, the handwriting doesn't look like yours. The entries are familiar, but they feel distant, and you realize you wrote them, but you're no longer the person who needed to. This is the soft mercy of memory. It allows us to carry our past without being crushed by it. It lets us re-narrate the moments that once defined us. But there's a danger too, because if memory can comfort, it can also deceive. You might cling to a version of the past that keeps you stuck. You might romanticize a relationship that was actually harmful. You might villainize someone whose story you never really knew. You might forget the context in which you made your hardest choices. The paradox is this: memory is both your greatest tether to identity and your biggest distortion of it. So what do you do with that? You let it breathe. You stop asking your memory to be perfect. You let it be symbolic, emotional. You listen to it like you would a dream, not as literal truth, but as layered meaning. And when the memories come, especially the ones that sting, you don't argue. You don't rewrite. You ask, what is this version of me still trying to say? Because that's what memory is, not a courtroom, but a chorus. A collection of selves calling forward across time. Not to trap you, but to remind you of your own becoming. Tonight, Hold this image close, a photograph developing slowly in dark water. At first it's blurry, then features emerge. But even at its sharpest, it's just a shadow of a moment. You'll never fully hold it, but you can honor it. So the question isn't what really happened. The question is, what version of that moment still lives in me, and why does it need to be seen? You've been told that things should make sense, that life is a sequence, that actions have consequences and everything happens for a reason. You've been taught to search for meaning, to trace lines between cause and effect, to believe that if you try hard enough, the chaos will resolve. But what if the universe doesn't agree? What if it never promised coherence? Because truthfully, there is no rule that says things must align. The stars do not owe you symmetry. Time does not owe you logic. The universe doesn't mind the mess. This realization can be terrifying, but it can also be freeing. The grandfather paradox is a beautiful fracture in logic. It exists because the human mind wants stories to loop cleanly. It says, if I go back and change something, that change undoes me, which undoes the change. And so we spiral, trying to fix a narrative that resists closure. But the cosmos isn't asking for neatness, it's asking for surrender. You are not here to make sense of everything. You are here to experience everything, even the contradictions, even the fragments, even the broken mirrors. In philosophy, this touches the edge of absurdism. Camus wrote that life is absurd precisely because we keep trying to impose meaning on a universe that offers none, and yet we go on, we fall in love, we get up, we laugh, we reach. Not because it makes sense, but because it's ours. Imagine this: a swirl of stardust floating through black space. No beginning, no edge, no pattern. And within it, your timeline, a thread, frayed, curved, golden, completely out of place, and yet part of the whole. That's you, not logical, but real. We often think that if we could just organize our story, if we could find the point of pain and rewind it, patch it, redo it, we'd finally become who we're meant to be. But maybe there is no meant to. Maybe identity isn't a destination, but an improvisation, a spiral, a dance. And maybe the universe isn't testing you or teaching you or punishing you. Maybe it's just being. And somehow in that indifference, there is peace. Because it means you can stop trying to earn your place here. You already have it. This is not to say your pain doesn't matter. It does, deeply. But your pain doesn't need to make sense to be honored. Your grief doesn't need a lesson. Your love doesn't need a reason. You can feel fully without understanding completely. Symbolically, imagine a mosaic, tiny, shattered tiles. None of them beautiful on their own, but together, accidental, uneven, unplanned, they form an image you never saw coming. Not perfect, but breathtaking. You are like that mosaic, a collage of almost maybes and what ifs. You were not assembled for clarity, you were assembled for depth. And here's the gentle paradox: the less you demand meaning, the more meaning you begin to find. Not in answers, but in presence. In the way the light moves across your room at dusk, in the way your breath steadies when you stop running from the question, in the quiet ache of knowing you may never understand, and choosing to live fully anyway. So tonight, stop looking for the clean line. Let the loop stay open. Let the story stay unfinished. Let the mess be holy. And ask yourself softly, can I love my life even when it doesn't add up? You find an old photo, maybe tucked inside a book, maybe in a box you forgot you kept. You weren't looking for it, but now it's in your hands. And there you are, smiling or not, caught mid-thought, wearing something you don't even remember owning. You know the moment vaguely, you know the setting, but the person, they feel foreign and not quite you, not anymore. There's a name for this moment when you look at your past self and feel like you're seeing a stranger. It's not nostalgia, it's dissonance, a fracture in self-continuity. It's the feeling of realizing that who you were no longer matches who you are, The ego resists this. It wants to believe in one seamless identity, a singular self moving through time unchanged in essence. But that's not how you work. That's not how time works. The grandfather paradox reminds us that one shift in the past can disrupt everything. But here's the twist. You don't need a time machine for that to happen. You are already the shift. You've changed so many times in ways too small to notice. A sentence someone said, a moment you broke, a laugh you held too long. Over time, your axis tilted. And now, looking back, you don't quite recognize the person who once carried your name. Jung wrote of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you are meant to be beyond the masks, beyond the roles. But the path isn't linear. It requires shedding, mourning, re-seeing. It requires letting go of the versions of yourself that were necessary then, but not now. So when you see that photo and it feels hollow or distant, it doesn't mean you've lost yourself. It means you've evolved. The self is not a stone. It's a tide. And some parts of you wash away, not because they were untrue, but because you outgrew them. Still, there's grief. You may miss the lightness in those eyes, the hope, the ignorance. You may envy the part of you that hadn't yet been hurt in the ways you now carry, or you may judge that version embarrassed by their choices, their patterns, their blind spots. But what if instead of judgment or longing, you tried something else? Compassion. Imagine sitting beside that version of yourself, no words, no corrections, just presence. You don't need to warn them about what's coming. You don't need to explain who you've become. You just need to be there as someone who made it through. Symbolically, it's like holding a faded letter you once wrote and never sent. You read the words and think, I remember this pain. I remember needing to say this. But you also feel the space that's grown between then and now. And you realize you've changed. But the letter still deserves to be read. The paradox here is subtle but profound. You are not who you were, and yet without that person, you wouldn't be here. So how can you honor them without becoming them again? Perhaps by recognizing that every version of you was doing the best they could with the light they had. And maybe instead of trying to erase the old you, you learn to carry them gently. There's a quiet humility in admitting you've changed, and a deeper strength in realizing you'll change again. Who you are now will one day feel just as distant, just as strange, just as blurry in someone else's memory, possibly even your own. Tonight, let yourself look at that photograph in your mind. Hold it with both hands. Breathe into it, not to judge, not to rewrite, but to whisper something soft. Thank you for carrying me this far. And then ask yourself gently, who am I becoming now, and can I allow the stranger in the photo to rest? There's a version of you that never grew up, not because they refused to, but because they weren't given the chance. They're not frozen in time. They're stuck in a loop, a quiet hallway in your inner world where the clocks don't move. The air is still. The door never opens. This is the child who waited, not for toys or sweets or permission, but for something deeper. A look that said, I see you. A voice that said, you're safe now. Arms that didn't recoil. Words that didn't wound. They waited for love that felt like home. For presence that didn't leave. For a timeline where they could just be without shrinking to fit someone else's story. And maybe no one came, or maybe someone came but too late, or in the wrong form, or with love laced in fear. So the child stayed inside, not dead, not gone, just repeating, playing the same memory, asking the same question. When will it be safe to come out? In trauma psychology, this is called the frozen child, or the developmental arrest. But in dream logic, it's simpler, a carousel playing the same tune forever. Round and round, the music sweet, the motion sickening. The grandfather paradox once again becomes metaphor. Because what if the loop in your timeline isn't in the past, but inside you? What if the moment you keep returning to isn't a mistake, but a message? Not asking for a fix, asking for attention. Jung understood this well. He believed that the child archetype isn't just about innocence, it's about potential. The untouched self. The raw, sacred center we abandon to survive adulthood. But it never abandons us. It waits, quietly, patiently, in dreams and triggers, in the soft ache you feel when someone is kind to you in a way you didn't know you needed. So how do you meet this child? Not by bursting into the loop and dragging them out. That would only scare them. Not by lecturing them on how the world works now. They don't care about logic. They care about tone, warmth, safety. You meet them by sitting beside them, by being the adult they never had, by becoming the timeline they always needed. And you might say, but I don't know how to be that. That's okay. Neither did the people who raised you. You're not meant to do it perfectly. You're meant to do it differently. Symbolically, imagine a carousel in the dark. The lights flicker, the horses rise and fall. No one else is there, just one child, watching, waiting. When you step closer, the music softens, the air warms. You sit beside them, you don't need to speak. Your presence breaks the spell. That's the loop beginning to loosen. Here's the paradox. The past cannot be changed, but the meaning of the past can. And sometimes that's enough. Because when you give that child inside you what they needed, not back then, but now you shift the entire system. The present begins to move, the loop opens, the frozen becomes fluid. And what was once a cycle of pain becomes a spiral of healing. That child may never fully leave. They are part of you now. But their needs don't have to control your life anymore. When you hear them, truly hear them, they stop screaming. They become quiet companions, soft reminders, gentle roots. Tonight, imagine sitting with your younger self. Picture them clearly. Their clothes, their posture, their eyes. You don't need to explain anything. You just need to say one thing and mean it. You didn't deserve what happened. Let it land. And then ask in the silence that follows, are you ready to come with me? Or shall I keep sitting with you a while longer? At some point in this unraveling, a quiet realization begins to form subtle. At first, like a whisper behind the thoughts. All this time, you've been circling the loop, trying to understand it. Trying to untangle the sequence, fix the timeline, explain the contradictions. But what if the paradox isn't just around you? What if it is you? Not in the grand metaphorical way, not in the poetic sense, but literally, what if you are the contradiction walking through time, the effect and the cause, the child and the caretaker, the question and the answer, the one who longs for change and the one who resists it? What if the timeline is breaking, not because of something you did, but because of something you are? You contain opposites. You seek freedom, but cling to safety. You want love, but fear being seen. You long to let go, but obsess over control. You are stitched together from conflicting instincts, and somehow still, impossibly, you walk forward. That's the paradox, and maybe that's the point. There's a story in physics, a thought experiment known as the bootstrap paradox. A time traveler goes back and gives a famous composer a copy of his own future music. The composer then uses it to write his works. The question is, who actually created the music? The loop has no beginning, no origin, it just exists. Maybe you feel like that sometimes, like you can't trace where a part of you began. Like your dreams have always been with you, even before you had language. Like the person you're becoming already existed, waiting for you to grow into them. So here's the wild, quiet truth. You may be your own origin. You may be the reason you survived, the reason you kept going, not because someone rescued you, not because time was kind, but because something in you timeless and inexplicable, refused to collapse. And that thing wasn't logic. It wasn't certainty. It was the paradox inside you. The spark that can hold pain and beauty at once, that can grieve and hope in the same breath. Symbolically, imagine a candle lighting itself. No match, no hand, just a flame born from itself. That's you. You are the self-lit flame, a spark with no clear source. You confuse people. You confuse yourself. You contradict. You disrupt. You dissolve expectations. You long for belonging, and yet you were never made to fit. That's what makes you rare. Because the world wants stories with clean arcs, it wants good or bad light or dark cause then effect. But your nuance, your memory folding into vision, your past bleeding into present, you're becoming something that doesn't have a name yet. And here's where Jung returns, because individuation isn't about arriving at a singular fixed identity. It's about integrating your opposites, becoming whole through your contradictions, not in spite of them. So what if all this time you weren't broken? What if you were simply a being that cannot be explained in straight lines? What if your self-doubt was the ego clashing with something far older inside you? Something non-linear, something cosmic. You were not made to be solved. You were made to be held. That's the paradox. And when you finally stop trying to make yourself make sense, when you stop editing your edges, you find peace not in answers, but in presence. Because maybe the question isn't, how do I fix this loop? Maybe the question is, can I be the loop and still be free? Tonight, rest with that image, a spiral unfolding in both directions, neither forward nor backward. And at the center, yourself, and not the version you perform, not the one you defend, but the part that remains when everything else dissolves. The paradox alive and breathing. So ask yourself not to explain, but to witness. What if I'm not here to choose one side of me, but to learn how to carry them all? If you could go back to one moment, just one, would you? Not to relive it, but to change it, to shift the angle, to say something softer, to leave 5 minutes earlier, to stay 5 minutes longer. You probably already know the moment. It lives in your chest like a dull pressure. It flashes behind your eyes when the world gets quiet. You tell yourself you've moved on, but if the opportunity came to go back, you might take it. Not out of regret exactly, but from a need to touch the timeline again, to see if you could change what unfolded next. But here's the paradox: if you did go back and alter it, would you still be you? The pain shaped you. The silence taught you. The rupture opened something that no calm ever could. To erase the moment might also erase the becoming. And maybe that's why we don't get to go back. Because who we are is built from the tension between what we wanted and what actually happened. Still, it's tempting. The idea of repair, of control, of touching the broken thing and watching it unbreak. You imagine speaking with clarity instead of fear, choosing trust over retreat, letting yourself be held instead of walking away. You imagine a different life unfolding, but deep down, you also know that version of you didn't exist yet. They were still forming. They hadn't found the words. They hadn't grown the courage. You want to go back and make a better choice, but you're only able to want that now because of who you became after. That's the loop again. Cause and effect tangled. Pain and growth entwined. You don't get to separate them. You carry them both. So instead of changing the moment, what if you returned only to witness it differently, not as judge, but as witness? What if you revisited it, not to rewrite it, but to bring it kindness it never received? Picture an unopened letter. It's old, yellowed at the edges, addressed to your younger self. You know what it says? You've read its contents 1,000 times in your head, but now finally you open it, and instead of shame or warning or blame, it simply says, you did the best you could, and it was enough. And that's the healing. Not altering the past, but offering it a new place in your heart. Because The part of you that still aches for that moment isn't wrong, it's just unfinished. Not because the timeline is broken, but because your compassion hadn't yet reached that far back. Gabor Maté teaches that healing doesn't come from reliving pain. It comes from meeting the wounded part of ourselves with something new: safety, presence, warmth. That's what going back really means. Not time travel, emotional time repair. So tonight, instead of wishing for a machine or a miracle, try this: close your eyes. Return to the moment. See it clearly, all of it. The confusion, the reaction, the breath you held, the word you didn't say. And then bring your current self into that room. The you who has made it this far, the you who knows what that version of you needed. Sit beside them, say nothing, just be there. Because presence is the greatest rewrite. And here's the soft paradox. You don't have to go back to change the past. You only have to go inward to feel it differently. You may never get the apology. You may never get the chance to explain, but you can give yourself closure without permission. You can say, that happened, and I survived it, and I will no longer hold it against myself. Tonight, hold the symbol in your chest, a doorway with no knob, no key, only light seeping through the cracks. You can't force it open. You can only sit with it until it opens on its own, until your readiness becomes the key. So ask yourself quietly, maybe for the first time, do I want to change the past? Or am I just asking for peace? Not everything loops. Some things end quietly, without applause, without explanation, a conversation that never resumed, a goodbye without the final glance, a version of you that slowly faded into memory. And yet, even the endings hold echoes. Even the silence remembers. The grandfather paradox was never really about time travel. It was about you, the part of you that wonders what would have happened if you'd arrived earlier or later. The you that longs to rewind just to understand. The you that grieves what never had the chance to be real. But maybe there's beauty in not knowing. Maybe life was never meant to resolve like a story. Maybe we were always meant to carry our contradictions, to exist both as question and answer, longing and arrival, shadow and spark. So tonight, you don't need to solve the paradox. Let it remain open. Let it breathe in your chest. Let it walk beside you like a quiet friend, because you are not broken. You are becoming. Again, still, the loop may never close, but that doesn't mean you're lost inside it. It means you're still here, still choosing, still carrying light through time. So rest now, not because everything makes sense, but because it doesn't have to. And as you drift into that soft place between waking and sleep, remember this: you are not late, you are not early, you are not a mistake in the timeline. You are the moment remembering itself. End of script, drift gently, and I'll meet you in the next thought.